source of life and cause of death. Water can wash away clues, dilute evidence, and conceal corpses. For investigators, water can be a cunning opponent. For criminals, a most accommodating ally. For the perfect crime, just add water. In a suburb of Montreal, Quebec, a cunning and perverted criminal uses water to destroy every trace of his crime. For months, investigators try to focus an enormous number of leads. May 2002. Jessica Grimard did not come home last night. Her parents are distressed that their 14-year-old daughter has not even called. Her father hopes that Jessica spent the night at a friend's. He calls to try and track her down, but no one knows where she is.
At
the same time, he had a kind of premonition that his daughter was near the water. Not far from where the family lives, in Rivière-des-Prairies, there's a stream. The father decided to walk to the stream to see if there were any signs of his daughter there.
Jessica's father searches a park across the street from their home. The stream is swollen by the spring rains.
In his mind, the father could see the water and his daughter close to the water. But you don't just think, okay, I'm gonna solve a crime.
Within minutes, Jessica's father finds a shoe, then the horrifying discovery of his daughter, lifeless. Detective Sergeant Joanne Barabé is with the Montreal Police Major Crimes Unit. She's the lead investigator.
I knew that she had been stabbed and her throat cut, and that the father had discovered his daughter's body.
Forensic technician France Gignac will assist Barabé to gather evidence from the scene.
What I remember from the day is that it was raining heavily as I headed to the scene. I knew the scene was outdoors, and I was thinking, oh my God, what will this scene be like?
They know the water will seriously complicate the investigation. Recent rain may have erased footprints, washed away bloodstains, and destroyed DNA evidence. Investigators start at the outside of the scene and work their way in toward the victim. The first thing they need to determine is the entry point.
It's an outdoor scene, which is more difficult. It's harder to tell where they came from. There are no entrance or exit doors. They could have come from anywhere. So we spent time looking at any openings we could see into the forest.
The next step for Joanne Barabé and France Gignac is to approach the victim, concentrating on what they can find all around her.
As I was crossing the forest, I saw the victim in the stream. I had a flash. I felt a sudden flush of horror, and I had to talk myself through it. To create an emotional barrier, because you can't let your emotions get the better of you. So I put my feelings totally to one side.
Gignac gathers evidence around the stream. What could the water be hiding, and what has it washed away? After a detailed examination of the crime scene, they turn their attention to the victim.
We went into the water to examine the victim, but without touching her, just going over her visually to look for anything noteworthy.
They confirm that the victim's throat has been cut.
All her blood had drained out of her. She was white and the wound was very apparent. There were several cuts through to the spinal column, so it was very apparent. There wasn't much blood near the victim's body. She was in the water, so the waves were gently lapping her. It was as if the victim had been given a thorough wash. She was in the water, and the water was doing its job.
While examining her clothing, they make a strange discovery.
The thing that was bothering me was that the victim had the leaf from a tree under her third sweater. But she was dressed when she was in the stream. So how did the leaf get there?
Joanne Berube suspects the victim was undressed and then her clothes were put back on.
There is the possibility of a sexual assault, which for now I can neither confirm nor rule out. But at the moment, the only clue I have is the leaf. And that leads me to believe that something might have happened.
She's in the water, but did she die in the water? Could it have happened out of the water? That was the other thing we wanted to know.
The procedure for gathering evidence on land is straightforward. But for evidence found in the water, the rules are different.
Sur cette scène-là, je sais qu'elle a les mains dans l'eau. Donc avant que le médecin...
At this scene, I knew the victim had her hands in the water. So before the coroner moved her, I decided to put plastic bags on her hands to protect them, in case there were things in her hands or under her nails.
Ou sous les ongles.
The investigators find bloodstains on branches and leaves. This indicates that the attack must have started on land. But what happened after that? Was there a struggle? Did she try to run and fall into the stream? Or did the perpetrator drag her there to wash away the evidence? Detective Sergeant Gilles Lafrance from the Major Crimes Unit interviews Jessica's father.
You can't fully enter into the grieving process right away because you have to provide information. You've just lost a loved one, a child, a sister, but for now you have to focus on remembering things. Who are her friends? Where was she going last night? What time was she supposed to come home? And who was she with?
Lafrance learns that Jessica's grandmother lives nearby. She saw a beige car parked on the street and a strange man got out and walked away. When she looked out before going to bed, the car was gone. Berube and Gignac have not found a weapon, a footprint, or a fiber that will lead them to a possible murderer. They'll continue their investigation the next day. Mario Arbor of the emergency response team is called in to assist. The investigators ask him to search the stream for a murder weapon.
We explained to them exactly what kind of equipment we had, including a metal detector. They wanted to know whether we could use it to look for metal in the water as well as on dry land. And it can be used in the water.
He is aware that the investigators have high hopes that his search will lead them to a murder weapon. He also knows that searching in water presents special problems.
If we start moving our hands around in the water with all the leaves and rocks, and we accidentally touch the tool or weapon, it can be devastating for the investigation.
Joanne Berube and France Gignac begin to uncover some fresh evidence.
Some blood had collected under the leaves, and because they were so wet, it hadn't had time to dry out.
Berube believes this is where the victim's throat was cut. Mario Arbor arrives at the stream and begins to look for a murder weapon.
Qu'est-ce que l'individu qui a créé ce crime-là a pu faire?
What could the person responsible for this crime have done afterwards? Could they have been nervous and run away immediately, leaving the knife at the scene? Or did they take the time to clean it, hold it tightly, and keep it on them? Or did they just go and hide it somewhere nearby? In the water, on the shore, or in the bush? Or after committing the crime, did they throw it as far away as they could? It's as if you're trying to get into the killer's head. You're trying to figure out what he might have been thinking, how he might have reacted. If I were him, what would I do with the stream here?
The investigation requires patience and attention to detail.
Et l'eau, c'est aussi différent de la...
Working in the water is different from working on land, because when you look in the water, the image is refracted. And if you put your hand in the water, it creates ripples, so you could lose sight of whatever you thought was there.
Gignac and Berube continue to make progress.
We also discovered a second earring that was deeper among the leaves. Had it been torn out by the suspect? Can we find DNA from the suspect on it? That's the important thing for an investigator.
Each new discovery raises new questions.
Sur la scène, on peut présumer qui.
At the scene, you can assume anything. It's a man, it's a woman. Here we have a 14-year-old girl who has been found dead. Was it jealousy? It could be a man or a woman. All these things were going through our minds.
After several hours, Mario Arbor has to admit defeat.
Rien. On n'a rien trouvé qui pouvait nous dire que ça...
We found nothing at all that we could say must have belonged to the suspect. That made us think that the person must not have been nervous and must have been aware of what they were doing, and that they may have carefully kept the murder weapon with them.
After 2 days, there is still no evidence leading them to a murderer. Joanne Berube reviews the autopsy results with Gilles Lafrance.
La victime a 25 plaies, dont 9 plaies de défense.
The victim has 25 wounds, including 9 defense wounds. She has been stabbed on the body, and her throat has been cut very deeply, with extreme violence. The wounds are very deep. I asked him whether she'd been sexually assaulted, but the pathologist had told me that there was no evidence of sexual assault.
Berube can't stop thinking about the leaf she found on Jessica's body. She calls the medical examiner to tell him about her suspicions. Since there is no trace of semen, the coroner cannot confirm nor rule out the possibility of rape. France Gignac prepares all the exhibits to send to the forensic lab. She hopes that the scientists will be able to find traces of DNA and that the water hasn't contaminated the samples. The community is in shock. Nearly 1,000 people attend Jessica's funeral to express their sympathy to the family and friends. Others hold a quiet vigil in the forest. Somewhere in town, the murderer is hiding. The investigators continue their work in the neighborhood. They've received more than 30 leads. Each one has to be thoroughly explored. Joanne Berube wants to know everything about Jessica. She interviews the family, neighbors, friends, schoolmates, and teachers. Everyone in her social circle.
Alors, plusieurs pistes en même temps.
We were considering a number of possibilities. Should we be looking at her friends? Could it be a revenge after some kind of quarrel? Was it a love triangle? Even young people can react differently sometimes.
The investigators learned that Jessica was a good student. She got along well with all the kids at school. She was always willing to help them. She was starting to get interested in boys, but she wasn't known to have a boyfriend. No one seemed to be jealous of her or want to get revenge. She was always with her parents, sisters, or friends. She never went anywhere alone. There was nothing suspicious about Jessica.
J'apprends sur la jeune fille
What I learned about the girl was that there was nothing at all that could move the investigation forward. Nothing that could explain how she came to be where she was found. Nothing that could help us. No clues. Absolutely nothing.
The investigators widened their search.
Parce que aux alentours
In the area where she was found, there are 3 centers where there are people who have been released, either from prison, from a detention center, or from an institution.
Barrow Bay checks all the individuals released from custody during the months preceding the crime and finds no one. She also checks all the incident reports involving a beige vehicle during the week of the crime, and once again, nothing. All the forensic reports have been returned, and no leads are produced.
Unfortunately, no DNA was found on the scene, and the victim didn't have any traces of DNA on her. No detail had been left. When we were at the scene, we were thinking, it's either someone close to her who really had it in for her, or we are dealing with a murderer who has obviously killed before. And if we're looking for a serial killer, we really, really want to find that person. Because if this isn't their first murder, it won't be their last either.
5 months pass and the police have hit a dead end. They have no DNA, no fingerprints, no motive. They've run out of leads. It takes a remarkable series of events for the investigators to discover a connection, one that will bring them into contact with the diabolical criminal. A 14-year-old girl named Jessica Grimard is found fully clothed with her throat cut in a small stream in suburban Montreal. The murderer is still at large, convinced that water has washed away the evidence of his crime. Locked away in a Quebec prison is one of the worst sexual predators in the country's history, a dangerous offender who has been sentenced to life. During a routine check, a security officer opens the mail sent to the prisoner. In an envelope addressed to that cell, he finds a pornographic photo of a very young girl. As a result of the photo, the agent requests special authorization to read all the mail that goes in and out of that inmate's cell. For 6 weeks, all the mail going in and out of the prisoner's cell is photocopied before being delivered. Jennifer Coulombe, an analyst with the Sexual Assault Unit, examines dozens of perverted letters. She tries to establish a chronology and connections between the depraved stories.
There was a lot of things that were written that weren't real. They never happened because the letters were written to entertain. My goal in this was to take the letters, see if it mentioned a crime, and see if I could link that crime to one that was reported to the police department.
The letters are always signed with the name Frank or Frankie.
But when there was a crime committed, he used another alias. He talked in the third person. So he would write stuff like Bob's Adventure. So all of a sudden, Frankie became Bob for the crime and then became Frankie again.
Among all the horrifying letters, she comes across an account of a sexual assault that gives the name of the victim. It's the only letter in which the victim is identified, a young woman in her 20s. Jennifer Colomb recognizes the name and notifies her superiors. The lead investigator in charge of this case is Serge Richard with the Sexual Assault Unit in Montreal.
In July 2002, I was informed about a sexual assault charge, a young woman in Rivière-des-Prairies who had managed to escape from her attacker. She had told the police that she was waiting for a bus. It was raining. Someone came to the bus stop and started talking to her. They chatted, talked about the weather, and the person offered her a ride. He said, "I have a vehicle not too far from here." When they came to his vehicle, he opened the door politely, and she got in and sat down. He touched her breasts and thighs, and she managed to escape while he was trying to tie her up. She managed to bite him and open the door and run, leaving her belongings in the vehicle. We had a description of a pale-colored American vehicle. We had the height, weight, age, and physical description, but not enough to make a composite sketch.
Not only does the letter give Serge Richard the date and location of the attack, but it also has a return address on the envelope.
So that morning, I went to the commercial address. I started going through the area looking for a pale-colored American vehicle.
From the license plate, he traces the identity of the owner, Angelo Collaleo. Richard finds that Collaleo is a cell phone dealer with a long criminal record that includes several violent sexual assaults. The young woman is asked to come in and try to identify her attacker from a photo lineup.
It was positive. She recognized the person we had identified from the license plate, which was Angelo Collaleo. She recognized him from the photo lineup. That was her attacker.
Serge Richard requests an arrest warrant and 9 search warrants. While he waits for authorization, he puts Collaleo under surveillance. He doesn't want him to slip away. Mario Arbor is given the task of following him. He knows that Collaleo has been incarcerated several times for rape and that he may be armed. Collaleo seems to be on edge.
We wanted to be sure we didn't lose him. We wanted to be sure that he would be arrested and that there would be no more victims.
We had the impression he was looking for a victim. He went out a lot, spent the night driving around for half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, an hour. If he wanted to rest, he would just park his car, put the seat back for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then be on his way.
We were like chained dogs, just waiting to get the go-ahead. But the ones holding the chains were the investigators.
Finally, the arrest warrant arrives. The police know he could be armed and dangerous. They proceed cautiously.
Je me souviens comme si c'était hier, ça, c'est que...
I remember it as if it was yesterday. When we moved in, spotted the individual and called him. That was it.
C'était comme...
We had
On
him.
l'a, là. C'est fait.
Colaleo is arrested for the sexual assault of the woman he picked up at the bus stop.
Calme. Très calme. À un point tel que c'en était presque...
Calm. Very calm.
Parce que...
So much so
C'est comme s'il y avait...
that it was almost shocking.
Comme si...
It was as if everything was fine. Everything was normal. It was quite remarkable. And even when he was handcuffed, there was no sign of nervousness, no tenseness. But he had a distant look. He looked lifeless.
The same day, the police searched Colaleo's home.
Ce qui a été trouvé chez M. Colaleo et des...
What was found at Mr. Colaleo's home was enough to convict him. Items from the sexual assault that had taken place in July and correspondence between the dangerous offender and himself. Letters he had received. There was also a computer on which we found letters he was writing. We found a bag he'd used for committing the crimes.
Investigators know that Colaleo attacked the young woman at the bus stop. But how many other crimes has he committed?
Je rencontre M. Colaleo.
I interrogated Mr. Colaleo for five and a half hours.
5 heures, 5 heures et demie.
I tried to find out more about him, his personal life, his private life, and so on. We chatted, as if I was trying to make friends with someone, and he was quite open, as we talked about all kinds of things. He had been married, no children, normal childhood, nothing out of the ordinary. He'd taken some courses and was in the cellular telephone business. An average guy that you might meet at the mall or on the street.
Richard tells him about all their discoveries, all the searches, all the people they have questioned, and that he had been under surveillance.
We didn't tell him this all at once. We gave him a little additional information from time to time, and every time we alluded to the events, he always became very pensive. Always. When we started talking about the crimes, he got even more distracted. From time to time, he seemed completely lost in space. And I remember I would snap my fingers or say, "Angelo such and such," and then he'd snap out of it. I felt as if... Have you ever seen the movie Silence of the Lambs? It was one of the longest interrogations I've ever conducted in my career. And I felt as if I was with a guy like that.
Pour compléter, à la fin,
It would end with, "I'll see you later. I can't talk about that. I'm too tired." It would be midnight or 1 in the morning, and he'd say, "I'm exhausted. I haven't slept. You know, you were following me. I haven't had any sleep. I'm tired."
Colaleo refuses to cooperate, but he still feels the need to brag about his secret. While in custody, he describes his horrific deed to his cellmate. The man becomes an unexpected ally for the investigation. The lifeless body of 14-year-old Jessica Grimard has been found in a stream that flows near her family home. The investigators do not have any leads in her case. They arrest Angelo Colaleo for an unrelated sexual assault in the same part of the city.
I was called in to administer a polygraph test to a prisoner who had been charged with murder.
The prisoner tells Gilles Lafrance that his cellmate, Angelo Callaleo, has confessed to a heinous crime. He cut the throat of a young girl and left her in a stream in the Montreal suburb of Rivière-des-Prairies.
So when he told me that, since I had worked on the case of the girl who was in the same neighborhood, I thought, my God, we have our suspect and he's here in the detention center.
Joanne Barabé asks Lafrance to convince the murder suspect to be an informant and get more details from Callaleo.
And the next day, we went to see him and get more details. And to our great surprise, he gave us details from the scene of the crime that had not been mentioned before, such as the way the victim had been discovered, facts that could only have been known to the perpetrator of the crime, and to the investigators who had gone over the crime scene.
Callaleo's crimes are so depraved that even another murderer can't keep them a secret. He agrees to cooperate.
L'informateur va écrire, va prendre des notes le soir.
At night in his cell, the informant would secretly make notes on the information he had received. He was even able to make sketches of the crime scenes and exactly how he carried out the crimes. Quite specific details. This information was sent to us week by week.
The case against Callaleo is getting stronger. Investigators must now confirm that the letters taken from his apartment match the ones sent to the dangerous offender in prison under the pen name Frank. The Quebec Provincial Police seize the mail in the dangerous offender's cell. They find over 350 letters full of sex, violence, and murder. There are nearly 30 written by Callaleo. All these letters are passed on to Jennifer Colomb. She begins the daunting task of reading over 1,500 pages of horrifying correspondence. She comes across a letter written 10 days after Jessica's murder. It describes in detail the rape and brutal murder of a young girl. A sickening letter, unbelievably sadistic and depraved.
And it started off with, "Hi, how are you? I'm fine, how's work, this and that." And then all of a sudden, the letter stops and it says, "I'm gonna tell you about something that happened, an adventure." And the adventure starts off with this guy going in his car, how he looked for somebody. It could have been anybody. What he was looking for, he knew. The type of evening it was, the description of the rain and everything else, that was part of his plan. He described extremely graphic detail, the pursuit, the chase, the hunting of a victim. And what happened was he found one. Unfortunately, he found one. I couldn't fathom that people could do this to other people and describe it in graphic detail. It was extremely disturbing to read these letters. And even when it came to the fantasies, I had trouble thinking that human beings, one human being, could do this to another. It was difficult.
Joanne Barabé is notified with a copy of the letter.
I read the letter over and over again, many times. Every detail described in the letter was verified and consistent with the crime scene.
The details in this letter could have only been known by the perpetrator of the crime and the investigators at the scene. The position of the body, the location of the wounds, the way the wounds had been inflicted, a description of the victim, and the exact time and location of the crime.
C'est très difficile de lire.
It was
tous
very
ces
difficult to read all those
détails.
details.
C'est difficile dans le sens que
It was difficult in the sense that when you go to a scene, you only know what you see.
en lisant,
But reading that letter,
on peut voir
you could see the feelings of the attacker,
de l'agresseur.
how he was enjoying what he was doing.
Aimer ce qu'il faisait.
And he also describes the feelings and the suffering of the victim.
Kalaleo actively hunts down his prey. He writes, "I'm going to wait for her next week and see where she lives. The next day, I will try to see if there's anyone at home. If not, I'll use the flower delivery technique. Believe me, I work hard to make sure I don't leave any traces." On May 7th, 2002, Kalaleo decides to make his move. A little after 8 p.m., he spots his prey. A few hundred meters further, and she'll be safe at home. He has to intercept her calmly without frightening her. He asks her the time and strikes up a conversation.
Et puis là, il va sortir un couteau.
Then he got out a knife, put it to her throat, and took her to the forest. And then he sexually assaulted her.
He brutally rapes her next to the stream. Then he promises her he will spare her life if she does what he says. He has Jessica wash away all traces of his crime.
Après l'agression sexuelle,
After
il
the
va
sexual
ordonner à la
assault,
victime
he says to his
d'aller
victim,
te laver.
"Go and wash in the stream. I don't want anything of me left on you,"
Tu restes rien avec moi.
even though he had worn a condom.
Puis il avait mis un
The victim didn't want to because the water was very cold.
Elle veut pas parce que l'eau est très froide.
So then he showed her the knife and said,
Là, il dit,
"You don't have a choice. Go and wash."
When she walks out of the stream shivering, he lets her put her clothes back on.
alors c'est à ce moment-là qu'il va
That was when he cut her throat and stabbed her repeatedly.
rendu à son domicile, il va se coucher.
Back at home, he went to bed. He was remembering what he had done and began feeling aroused.
Il y a de la
And then he thought, there's DNA. I didn't get rid of all the DNA. So he went back to the scene. He took the victim's body and moved it around a bit to wash it.
The letter is dated May 17th, 2002, 10 days after the crime. Line after line, the murderer relives what he has done, triumphantly sharing it with his old prison mate.
C'est vraiment un prédateur, là. C'est vraiment une personne qui a du sang-froid.
He is truly a cruel, cold-blooded predator. One who knows our investigation techniques and will do anything to make sure he doesn't get caught. Even if that means going back to the crime scene twice.
Among the letters, Jennifer Colomb has found 2 other stories of rape and murder that seem very real. These stories are consistent with the deaths of 2 girls in 1993. In both cases, the murderer used fire to hide the evidence. Can Kalaleo be responsible for these deaths as well?
Alors, c'est de vérifier au niveau des dos.
So I had to look at these 2 other murders that had been made to look like fires. I needed to see whether I could resume the investigations and find evidence that would match his accounts of the scenes.
The cases against Kalaleo are multiplying. It seems inevitable that he will spend the rest of his life in prison, or will he find a way to escape his fate? The serial rapist, Angelo Kalaleo, has been arrested again. He is now a suspect in 3 murders, including 14-year-old Jessica Grimard. Jessica was found by her father in a stream near their home. Jennifer Colomb believes she has found confessions to 3 murders in the letters written by Kalaleo.
In one of them, he described a Zemo of how he committed a crime, of how he committed a sexual assault. And it was written as though it was written in a police report. Here is my MO. This is exactly how I do my crimes. And he described about how he gained access to a house. He described how he coerced the victim.
Colaleo had developed a well-executed technique for capturing his victims. After gaining their confidence, pretending to be a flower delivery man, messenger, or repairman, he would ask to use the washroom.
He would use the washroom and put something in the toilet bowl to make it foam up. Then he'd say to the person, "Come have a look. There's something wrong with your toilet." Then he would draw his victim into an enclosed space. And then he would handcuff her and threaten her. He would take her to her bedroom and sexually assault her. And then he would use his own special technique. He would strangle his victim just long enough so that she was still breathing. And then he would set the house on fire. So the victim was still breathing and there were no marks.
Colaleo had always captured his victims in a controlled place, inside their homes or in his car, places where he would be sure that he could wash away every bit of evidence. Jessica's murder was the first time in his psychotic career that he deviated from his strategy. Colaleo confessed his secret to the cellmate in jail. He was haunted by the fear of leaving traces next to the stream. Joanne Berube has gathered evidence to charge Angelo Colaleo in 3 cases, including the murder of Jessica Grimard. Crown Prosecutor Louis Bouthier will take the case to trial. He is faced with a tough opponent.
Colaleo was careful because he had already been convicted. He'd already been given long prison sentences. In his letters, he says that he has been careless in the past, but he will not make that mistake again. So, he said, in graphic terms, that he would not let another victim get away from him if they could identify him.
Bouthier believes he has overwhelming evidence. The detailed confessions made by Colaleo to the informant and the explicit descriptions he wrote in the letters can both be used to convict him.
It is often said that in a criminal trial there is one witness who is very important. But in this case, our important witness was the letters Colaleo had sent to the individual incarcerated in Port-Cartier.
Colaleo's lawyer objects to the admissibility of the letters. They are so explicit and pornographic that they will likely sway the jury. As well, Colaleo gives vulgar details about the crimes he wants to commit in the future, which are not admissible.
I will spare you the details, but they were absolutely horrifying. Things involving young children and their parents. Unimaginably violent. Often ending with the death of the young victim.
In his letters, Colaleo also talks about his ultimate dream.
And his dream is to be out, to help his buddy escape from prison, find a house and bring victims to that house to gratify their depraved appetites. When he talked about that, he compared himself to another famous psychopath, Paul Bernardo.
The preliminary hearing begins for the 3 counts of murder. Colaleo appears before the court.
The image he projected was of the guy next door, a very average, ordinary guy you wouldn't have noticed on the street.
The trial date is set for January 9th. The families of the victims have prepared themselves to relive their ordeal. All the media in Quebec are prepared to give it maximum coverage. But 2 days before trial, Colaleo is found lifeless in his prison cell. It is a hard blow for the Crown, and a completely unexpected one.
We were to start jury selection on Monday at 9:30.
and I was notified of Mr. Colalillo's death at 9:20, 10 minutes beforehand.
Colalillo died of a drug overdose. Some people are happy that Colalillo's suicide was a self-inflicted death penalty. Others think he was too cowardly to stand trial. Colalillo used water to cover up a nearly perfect crime, but his arrogant admissions were his downfall. He gave investigators the evidence they needed to beat him at his own game.